Hi everyone, it's Raina. So this video is if you have your Sun in Scorpio and your Moon in Taurus. This is the third time that I've attempted to make this video. Well, probably more than that because I keep starting and stopping, but I mean, I went on for almost an hour, like 50 minutes altogether on those two separate occasions. And one of the things that I forgot in the first video was mentioning sex with this combination, and that's very important. So I'm going to make sure to bring it up this time around. What we're talking about with Scorpio and Taurus are signs that oppose one another, which are also called complementary signs because the elements that they represent, Scorpio is water, Taurus is earth, they are complementary, they are harmonious. And those two words aren't synonymous, so I don't want to give that impression. But there will be things that these two signs have in common. One of them is that the houses that they rule both involve money. Taurus, the second house, is even I think is pretty exclusively about the money that we earn, although they also talk about self-esteem, possessions, things like that. But possessions are kind of the material objects. The eighth house is more varied and complex as far as I'm concerned. And but it can be about shared resources. So that's one area of common ground. But in any case, the sun is our truest sense of self. When we incarnated, the sun sign is the sign on the day we were born. And it's the main influence. When we say, hey, baby, what's your sign? The reason we're talking about the sun sign is because it is so central to our identity this time around, not our ultimate identity. That's an important distinction. And it is our aspirational self, so it is what we desire to become that we share with the world. You know, the moon is more insular, it's more inside, it's our emotions, but sometimes, especially with certain signs like Scorpio, like people who have their moon in Scorpio, they can be very secretive about their emotions, and they don't readily share them, and they might even have a poker face. With the sun in Scorpio, I think that this combination is actually a more harmonious one, or a combination that has less possible issues than the opposite, where the sun is in Taurus and the moon is in Scorpio, simply because the moon in Scorpio is quite challenging for a person to have to contend with. And I've already done that video, so this was a request, and I had to look it up because I thought I had done this one before. So what does Scorpio aspire to become? I mean, and obviously I could be talking about what the person does for a living very easily or wants to have as their career. And with Scorpio, we're talking about a fixed water sign. So anytime any water sign is going to have intuitive gifts. Now, whether they are fully explored is a different story. Sometimes people have psychic abilities that just spontaneously manifest, and the person doesn't have to do anything about it. And that might be, I don't know, that might be the norm. But even with that, some people reject them. They're afraid of them. They sublimate them, and then they might lose some of that, because a lot of times it seems to show up in childhood, And depending on the people around them, if they are encouraged to display these gifts, then it can make it easier. But a lot of times, if the adults around the child are negative about it, they might feel like they're doing something wrong, and then eventually they get so covered by the world that they kind of forget that they were doing something like that. So this makes you a natural healer, or wanting to be. You're a natural empath, which means that you can feel the feelings of other people. Scorpio is a very strong sign. I think more than Cancer and Pisces, Scorpio tends to be more ruthless and less empathic in a victim mentality sense than maybe like a martyrdom sense than Cancer or Pisces. So it might be possible for you to set boundaries and not find yourself being taken for granted, or whatever it is that happens when we can feel, when we can put ourselves in other people's shoes. It can simply mean that you gravitate towards the healthcare profession without, when you're not really thinking about it in terms of spiritual careers. When you're thinking more on the practical level, because of course, with the high school vocation test, I don't think even in 2022 they're saying to teenagers, yeah, you should be a Reiki master. That's just not going to be the mainstream. And so I think it's not uncommon for people that end up becoming energy healers to start with just the mainstream healthcare field. Now, with Scorpio in particular, you are likely interested in psychology, and you're very astute when it comes to understanding human nature. And so that might be a route for you, for some of you, but for others, you may be more interested in some things that are connected to spirituality, because the house that you rule, the 8th house, is the house of the occult or metaphysics. And I think the biggest theme of the 8th house is transformation. That's why it's the house of death. If you are a nurse, you may be attracted to hospice, something where you can witness people as they leave this earth, and you can provide comfort because you're not afraid of death. But the idea of transformation is very appealing to you, even with your own life, where you want to transform yourself. You don't want to stay where you are. And it's like an inner type of journey and work. It's not the same thing as like Capricorn wanting to climb the ladder of success, because that is an outward aim. This is more of an internal personal journey of personal alchemy. And it's just something that is appealing to you, and you might at some point get into that line of work. But I just wanted to talk briefly about the Moon and Taurus, because I want to go back to possible careers and things like that. Well, let me just mention that, since I was already talking about it. One of the things about Scorpio that I keep saying that I now believe is that, like the other water signs, if you have it in a prominent position like sun, moon, or even rising sign, you may have experienced trauma growing up, whether it was continuous or just like a single event that kind of shaped you in one way or the other. I don't know. but I just keep um, experiencing this over and over again. Like, for instance, the death of a parent seems to be a big one, and a lot of times it's the father. And I don't know if I just came up with that on my own or if I read it somewhere, because I do believe that I've read that when you're a feminine sign, the father can be weak or absent, and dead is part of that too. But I was just thinking about people that I know or famous people, things like that. And that doesn't mean that other signs don't have their fathers die or a parent die. But the whole point of the water signs is to experience life through the emotions. Whereas, for instance, the air signs experience it through the life of the mind. So if an air sign loses a father, loses a parent, they may find that it's not this defining moment because they're able to, quote unquote, make sense of it, you know. Um, the emotions are much less controllable, and they're less logical. I mean, they're not logical, they're just instinctual. So, anyway, this can set up a fear of abandonment, and those kinds of issues can plague a person depending on how traumatized they were. But another one for that is seems especially true for Scorpio is sexual abuse. And one of the reasons why is because the eighth house is the house of taboos. And so, and by extension, secrets. And that is, sexual abuse is an area that oftentimes, if a child experiences it, they're not going to tell their parents, or anyone else for that matter. They keep it to themselves a lot of times, not all the times. And sometimes when they do tell, they're not believed and they're further traumatized. So, one of the things that can happen when the sun is in Scorpio versus the moon is that it becomes a part of your identity in a certain way, but not necessarily in a bad way. And the reason that I am differentiating from the moon sign is that a lot of times when somebody experiences something purely from their emotional state, it can be very easy for it to lead to feelings of victimization. When the sun is in Scorpio, you may have kind of like an old soul type of quality about you, that you have been around the block. You've been through a lot since you were a child, and so nothing really phases you. And like I said, I think Scorpio is a strong sign for the sun to be in. And so you're more likely to capitalize, if that's the proper way of putting it, on what happened to you by exploiting it and making it work for you. And I'm not saying that this is really the best route to take, because I think there are many pitfalls, but they can involve becoming a stripper or becoming a sex worker. And you could say that a stripper is a sex worker. And these are things you might be like offended that I'm saying that, and say, I would never do that. I'm never going to be a prostitute. I'm never going to, whatever. But the thing is that the Moon and Scorpio individual can do the same thing, but it's almost coming from that state of victimhood. It's not coming from a state of empowerment. And with the sun in Scorpio, the person is very aware of what they're doing and why they're doing it. They're realizing how powerful a hold it has, and how they can feel powerful by being in that position of having what somebody else wants, and that they can leverage it monetarily as well, and that they can make this fast money. Pluto is the lord of the underworld, and so Scorpios have to be impeccable with their values, whatever they are. Bob Dylan had in one of his songs a line where he said, "To live outside the law, you must be honest." And it's kind of funny because it sounds like a contradiction, but it's almost true. You have to know exactly why you're doing what you're doing, and what you hope to gain from it, rather than just reacting to what has been done to you in a way that is like kind of mindless and more just almost on automatic and from a position of victimhood. So and I'm not saying that like if a woman is sexually abused by a man, and she decides that she's going to, okay, well, I'm going to make money from this, and she's deciding from that point of view, and it's not vindictive, it's just simply matter of fact, then it's a lot better vibration. Again, overall, this kind of choice can be quite destructive ultimately, because there is still a lot of negative energy around it. It's not, if somebody is a massage therapist, they're touching people's bodies for money and making them feel good. But if they give them a happy ending, it becomes prostitution. So it just takes like one little maneuver, and all of a sudden it becomes this illegal act, and they can get arrested for it. So there still is this deep shame, deep confusion, and other negative emotions that are surrounding sex itself, and sex as a commodity becomes something that is considered, completely immoral. But really, I'm not here to, I'm not trying to convince anybody to go into the sex industry, not by a long shot. But I'm saying that if you have been there and done that, it would make sense to me, because I want to get to, I'll kind of finish off talking about this, but about sex and Scorpio, but I wanted to go back to talk a little bit about the moon in Taurus, because the moon is exalted in Taurus and I still am waiting to find out why, except for the fact that the moon is in the fixed modality, so it's very steady. It's the moon itself tends to fluctuate, so this can stabilize that fluctuation. And then on top of that, Taurus being ruled by Venus can have a more harmonious disposition, and maybe that's why. I think it really has to do with the fertility angle, and in the tarot, Taurus is connected to the Empress card, and that sense of the Earth Mother energy, the fertility. So creativity, maybe it has something to do with that. Abundance. So in terms of the emotional nature of this combination, it can actually be quite good, because the Taurus moon can steady some of that intensity of the sun, or absorb some of the intensity of the sun in Scorpio, which is naturally emotive, and make the Scorpio person be more detached, which Scorpio needs to become more detached in life. What I can see with this combination can be someone who, if they have been through any kind of like traumatic experience where because Scorpio can tend to have trust issues, And even when people have trust issues, it doesn't mean that they don't get involved in relationships, but they may get involved in relationships that are really dead end relationships or dysfunctional, where they don't have to really experience a true relationship. And an example of that is if you're with someone who is already taken. And that tends to be that sometimes that can be a dynamic that occurs. I don't know if Scorpio, because I knew somebody that was a Scorpio who was very adamant against being involved with somebody who was already taken. And I know, and I figure that a lot of that has to do with, I wouldn't want that to happen to me. And it's such a big deal to a Scorpio to be cheated on that they know that the karma of doing that to somebody else is like intense. But on the off chance that, you have found yourself in that type of relationship, there can be this desire for that emotional distance where, because people with the moon and earth energy dislike strong emotions, they don't really want to live their life on the emotional edge. And so you may be one of those people who find it hard to find like that common, that balance between your your Scorpio tendencies and that moon in Taurus. And it can lead to relationships, and especially if you have experienced betrayal or abandonment and things like that, and you do have problems trusting, where you just decide to be with somebody for their financial gifts or whatever. Well, not gifts, but for their financial status. And this is because, and I have done videos on hard angles from Venus to Pluto. And of course, Pluto is one of your rulers. Because Pluto can be about money, but it can also be about manipulation and control. And so a Scorpio person can also have their Venus in Capricorn, and that can be a very scheming type of Venus that really almost has like a certain demand that the person that they're with have, make X amount of money, have this type of job. And, it's like kind of gold digger tendencies. So the point being that you have to get very clear within yourself your motivations in love, because there might be a tendency to is there a word, make it a commodity out of love from that Taurus energy. Since Taurus rules the house of earned income, you might see that person as, it's almost like objectifying somebody and treating them like a commodity. And that might be like the moon in Taurus might tend to indicate somebody who is materialistic. And really, because it's the emotional placement, if you feel like you've been emotionally damaged, you might use material objects as a subject for feelings or what have you. And so if somebody gives you something, it can be a acceptable or even expected substitute for love. And so that can create relationships that are based on other things besides love. And eventually, the person realizes what they've gotten themselves into. They realize that they're not there for the right reasons, and they feel that sense of emptiness, and yet they can't, they have to extricate themselves. It's just a big mess. So what I would say about this is to be very above board when you're dealing with love situations, so that you are clear that you are in it for love and not for these other reasons. And then getting back to the sex thing, which, like I said, I forgot to mention, it's not that Scorpio is a sex machine. There are a lot of people that kind of jump to that conclusion based on some of the astrological cliches that exist. And definitely the eighth house can in part be the house of sex, but it's part of that house of transformation. I heard it described as sex magic, or you could say tantric yoga or something like that, where you're using sex in a higher way. And at the very least, the eighth house is the house of intimacy. So sex can be that, but it isn't automatically that. If you have sex with somebody and it's a one-night stand, that kind of thing can be destructive, because you have this illusion of intimacy that doesn't deliver, and the person leaves, and that can actually trigger a person who has experienced abandonment to be left over and over again through very quick sexual encounters. Women, and this is something for female Scorpios to realize, have a tendency when they're dealing in heterosexual relationships to either believe that they have to agree to sex before they're ready, simply because they don't want that potential partner to move on, or they feel like that is the way to kind of, like, how they used to say, getting into a man's heart is through his stomach. The way to a man's heart is through his stomach. Well, you could say through his, through his genitals. And you might really believe that with all your heart, that that's something you have to do in order to hook him in, reel him in. And it might work, but it's coming from a place that is fear-based, but is also false intimacy. When you're getting naked with somebody that you barely know, it can really take a lot from you, and you might not even think that. But a lot of people are getting drunk or high when they're having sex, and they're not even really tuning into how they're feeling emotionally. So that kind of thing can create negative patterns in relating to other people. And again, that idea of sex as a commodity, especially with the moon and Taurus. You look at the rising sign. If the rising sign is Taurus or Libra, the person is ruled by Venus, and they will tend to be physically attractive. Scorpio is the femme fatale. And so a Scorpio woman who's expressing herself like a Scorpio, if you have Scorpio rising, you might have some kind of like dress style that's very, not necessarily, it's sexy, but in a very kind of Black Widow spider type of way. I had a Scorpio girlfriend, and she said, let's wear fishnet stockings and smoke cigarettes or something. I forgot what she said one time years ago. And fishnet stockings, there's nothing, I think, more scorpionic than that. Because that can be like a fetish thing. And fetishes are part of the eighth house too. They're part of those psychological, psychologically created attractions that people have, or sexual triggers, and they're also taboo in a lot of cases. So that really relates to Scorpio. But anyway, especially addressing this to women, the idea that you have to attract a man, with same-sex relationships, I don't think it's going to show up that way because, women don't have those same requirements. But I'm talking specifically about heterosexual relationships. And if you find that you've had unsatisfactory relationships, perhaps you need to change the way you approach them. Maybe you are doing things, you're getting sexually intimate too quickly, and then you kind of gave away the store. And I'm not, that sounds very like old fashioned. I realize that. But I really think that some of those things, stand up to truth, and sometimes women think, well, I'm a liberated woman and I'm the one that wants the sex. But a lot of times, whether it's a man or a woman, what they really want is they want that sense of being close to someone. And so being able to pinpoint that and realize that that's what your motivation is can make it more likely that you're going to put it into practice. And then if somebody decides that they're not interested, then you weed those people out because you don't want that type of person as in a relationship. Now, if you are really in love with somebody and you choose wisely, you can love them for all time. This is a double fixed sign. But just in general, having a double fixed sign, you have to really learn how to cooperate, how to be able to not have your way all the time and give in and want to give in to the other party and because you could dig in your heels and then you're very obstinate, not very flexible. And in terms of professions, I've already talked about the healing arts. You may be very talented artistically. With the Moon and Taurus, you might be a singer, musically inclined, a musician, or any other type of artistic thing. I could see you being an actor with the Sun in Scorpio and that ability to slip into different characters. But definitely the spiritual arts, you may, with the Moon in Taurus, feel a little bit like skeptical about some of these things and kind of second guess yourself when it comes to your own things that come up for you. Having the Moon in Virgo, I know that that's true, where something comes into my mind and then I'm analyzing it automatically and bringing the mind into something with the emotions. So the emotions can be your intuitive nature. Learn how to go with it and not inject your mind too much to keep it away from that gut level intuition. And I'm trying to think, there was something else. I really should leave it there. I've already gone on so long. But I could keep talking about this. I hope that this resonated. If you would like a private reading, the link is below. Take care. Bye.